It's time for Booting Up. Welcome, everyone. Hope you're having a great evening, a great Wednesday. And today we're going to be talking to a designer from Facebook. Before that, he was at CareerFoundry, studied UX design there, and worked his way up the ranks, worked at a lot of great companies like Carfax and Capital One. So he learned a lot, very, very smart person. And we'll get into him in just a second. If it's your first time joining us, make sure to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and let us know what you do or don't like. We're always trying to learn from our guests and help you learn on your journey through tech. So let us know, and we will take that feedback to improve. Without further ado, let's bring on Abhi.
Hey, Rod, how's it going?
It's going good, man. How's it going with you?
Not too bad. We had a little bit of snow up in Arlington here today, so I enjoyed a little bit of a view while getting some work done. So it was kind of nice.
Yeah, you just snowed in right now?
Yeah, it's not like sticking to the ground, but you get a little bit of a view. I wish it did snow a little more because you get that little winter feeling of going out and building the snowman, but we got to stay at home. So
Yeah, I can't say I relate because I'm down here in South Florida, so
yeah,
never see snow.
a little bit different.
Yeah, have you been in that area in like Maryland for your whole life?
Yes, well, most of my life. So I basically, when I was 8, I grew up in India for the most part, and then I moved to Maryland and kind of stayed around, jumped around a little bit towards my later teenage years, but mostly stayed around the Maryland area, and then kind of made my way south slowly as I graduated from University of Maryland into Virginia because there's a lot of opportunities over here, and it's a nice place to be. So kind of have a foothold in Virginia at the moment.
Yeah, no, I'm sure. Like when it's not covered in snow, it's probably beautiful.
Yeah, it's not too bad if you can get over the humidity.
Humidity is something I can relate to down here.
Yeah.
But yeah, it seems like you're a Maryland through and through. Like you're saying, like you grew up there, kind of, and then you went to University of Maryland too. So like, was that always the plan to go to University of Maryland?
I kind of had it as something that I wanted to do in my high school because everybody was trying to get in to University of Maryland College Park or University of Maryland Baltimore County. So I kind of went to UMBC first, and then wanted a little more of the social experience that University of Maryland College Park offers, and so kind of matriculated my way down there. A lot of my friends were there too, so we kind of graduated together. It all worked out. So yeah. That's kind of how it ended up being. And, tuition's a little more affordable in state. So
always. Yeah. I went to UF, so I feel that.
Yeah. For sure.
How'd you decide on economics?
So it was actually an econ teacher that in high school who he was just an incredibly smart guy and wanted to make learning econ fun, and I think I just understood the notion of like supply and demand economics and kind of wanted to push the envelope on that a little further, and so I kind of got inspired by him, and at that time I was I had these aspirations to go into government and do economic policy, but very quickly learned that it wasn't for me through my internships. I did a lot of like finance stuff, like being an FP&A analyst at Amazon, and even in my first internship, I was a marketing analyst. I loved like crunching down I didn't like the crunching down of the numbers as much, but what they related to in terms of product and tech terms, I got really fascinated by that. And I would also say that was kind of my my introduction, my brief but very important introduction into UX design and that's kind of how I transitioned halfway through the my college experience, just kind of try to figuring out how what I wanted to do in my career is something that I really thought of around that time. But yeah.
Yeah, no, econ and all this like finance stuff, it's kind of completely opposite direction. Yeah. I guess it's more like the safe route, but like you said, you studied supply and demand, so you probably saw, hey, there's a demand for UX designers, so why not go into that? Is that part of it?
That you could say that's a part of it. There was an equilibrium there somewhere. Yeah, when I was kind of in college, I was just like, well, econ is great, it's important, and I think like the biggest thing I was learning through the whole experience of going through that like degree specifically, because it's kind of like it was a liberal arts kind of degree, right?
Yeah.
In College Park, especially, it was in your behavioral and social sciences um, school. And so what I really kind of learned there, it's like, okay, it like teaches you complex common sense, which at that time I didn't have much of anyway. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, but as I was trying to explore what I really wanted to do and got exposure through a bunch of internships, I slowly started to see the importance of the tech world, and kind of I think I kind of realized there that you could be a part of tech
Hmm.
without being like a programmer or a coder, which is
Yeah.
what my parents would always like push me to do. And that's actually, I got exposure to tech in high school when I was also doing a little bit of computer science, so kind of doing a little bit of everything, and I kind of got exposed there to that. But that was, I think, during my internships is when I first realized that you didn't have to be a coder there, and so I kind of did a little more of my soul searching around that time.
Yeah, no, it's a big epiphany when people find out you don't have to code to be in tech. Not everyone's a coder. Like it's a big epiphany, but then you realize something we talked about in last week's episode is how there's so many different careers you can go into in tech. It's not just code; it's design, obviously, sales, advocating, everything.
Yes, yeah, I couldn't agree more. As I got into my professional career, I was just like, anybody who has a touch point in tech from like a product perspective can it's tech today is like so central to every organization. And if you're whoever you are, you're a product manager, you're a marketer, you're dealing with the financials. It's
Hmm.
become a central part of everything that you're doing in your organization. I mean, like when I was in college, I didn't think of it that way, of course, but as I kind of came out and started working in different companies, I definitely found that more relevant than anything.
For sure. So like, what was like the final impetus that made you go to CareerFoundry specifically and UX design specifically?
Yes, sure. When I was in, and I like telling this story because it's kind of like you discover something by accident that was always like a part of you, and I think that was like my moment. But I didn't like realize it was there. I was in my internship at Amazon, and I was a financial analyst at that time, and I think that was like the point where I was just like, I don't think I will be doing this for many years to come. And I had no shame in admitting it at that time. So I was looking for options around that time. And coincidentally enough, one of the product managers that we were working with in trying to figure out how the cost center was going to be, what the headcount was going to be like. He kind of came down to our room, and he was just like, "Hey, we're doing some usability testing, and we'd like some participants. And I was wondering if there's any volunteers." I was like, "I don't know what that is, but that sounds cool, and I'll go for it."
It's the
And
right attitude to have.
yeah, it's not so bad. It paid off because once I was a part of that, and I was just like, so how are you gonna use these insights based on how I like use the product right in front of you? It's like, yeah, we're gonna take that input and we're going to interpret it and try to get some high level themes from a group of participants, and use leverage that to figure out what we're actually going to design. And from that moment, there came an hour-long conversation, which I'm sure he was a little tired of, but I was just curious about like the whole design thinking process. And from there, I made one of the most impulsive decisions in my life that night to go into um, different boot camps and explore everything from a cost basis, from a flexibility perspective. And when I saw CareerFoundry's boot camp, I said, okay, at that time it was $1,500, which I could afford. It was flexible, which was which was just what I needed, because I had just long hours, and I couldn't just take out my 9 to 5 internship for General Assembly, or even in the evenings. I don't think I had the discipline to go into class and go, pay attention while I kind of worked the numbers. So I dedicated a lot of my weekends actually to CareerFoundry. But it all ended up paying off because it was such a flexible but also in-depth program, and really involved too. So that's kind of how everything kind of came to be.
And it's definitely good pricing. We know like nowadays there's 15, 20, 25, even $30,000 boot camps. So
Yeah.
good to go on the lower route. And then you said it was also part-time, right?
Yeah, it was part-time. So the way it ended up working was I did as much as I could during my internship time, and then during summer break, just locked myself in a basement and treated it like a full-time job, 48 hours a week, but just kind of it's probably the most antisocial I've ever been. But yeah, at the time I just kind of locked down, finished it, and then by the time the last semester came around, I finished my semester as an econ grad. But at that time, I also got a foothold of a company that needed a design intern at the time, and that ended up being perfect because I was like, okay, now I have relevant internship experience that can go into the full-time job. So it was good timing.
So that's wild. So like basically like your summer break in between your semesters, that's when you did this boot camp.
Yes, that's around the time that I did put most of my effort into it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. No, I feel like usually it's like they work for a couple of years and then they transition, or maybe they finish even the degree and then they're like, let me transition. But I guess it's better to get a head start. As soon as you're not going to really do this field, it might make sense.
Yeah, exactly. And I was just like, I'm going to finish out my econ degree, but at the same time, I want to get into the job market as in my relevant field as quick as possible, because I didn't want to lose the momentum there. And that goes to show that the folks who are actually transitioning careers after they've graduated college, I I have so much respect for them, because they could be you could be anybody who's just like, all right, I'm going to focus my evenings and my weekends, and I'm going to do this, and it's going to take me It's it's a lot of dedication, and as you grow older, there's a limited amount of time for you to kind of dedicate yourself to that, because you just end up having responsibilities. So it's but I get inspired by the folks who I see transition into UX, or just any career in general, because I think they're doing the right thing, and it takes dedication to do that.
No, it definitely does. So like for your first job, like how'd you land that? I think you said like you just kind of knew someone.
Well, so there was an internship portal. There was that you could apply through University of Maryland, and there was just one design intern opening at that time. And then we just ended up, I just ended up getting a call back, and they're like, "Hey, we want to talk to you. We want to meet at a Starbucks." And I was like, "Yes, great, let's do it." And from there, within 3 weeks of graduating the boot camp, I got that internship. But the first job was kind of a little harder to land, because when I was in consulting, I had this a little bit of a lull between actually graduating and then getting my first full-time non-internship job. And it was around May where I secured that my first consulting kind of gig over there. So from there I just kind of I joined Capco at that time, tried to learn the ropes, and the rest is history.
So get into that first job. Like, what was the biggest shock? Coming from boot camp, there's certain things that they teach you a certain way. Was it very close to that, or was it like complete, like you were shocked and had to learn everything from scratch kind of?
Yeah, it was definitely more. I think it was none of what I learned in the boot camp felt unfamiliar. I mean,
Mhm.
like when you get into the interviews and you're getting into the job, it felt I was just like, I can't believe I answered those questions right because I didn't spend my 4 years like learning any of this. But I just spent like 3 months and 4 months like doing all this like work, and turns out like I can I can answer the questions in an interview. And so from there, I think the biggest shock for me was just like not being prepared for how to like collaborate and like not like how to like collaborate between different stakeholders, learning how to
Mhm.
work with developers, or engineers and product managers, and anybody on the business side. I think that's a lot of acumen and a lot of just a lot of learning that was needed. And I think the boot camp does a good job in kind of going through the broad strokes of what you might encounter. But
Mhm.
I think like one thing I wish that I kind of got a little more of a deeper dive into maybe is just like in a lesson or two, just kind of go into what really entails like product thinking, because I think I had
Yeah.
to just learn that a little more on the fly, in a different job. And consulting is different too. You're working with different clients, and so there's a whole like people relationships management kind of thing that you need to do. And I think part of that is just like learning on the job. That I think kind of shocked me a little bit, but I was glad of my role at that time because while I was a UX designer, um, a lot of the work that I was doing was very visual, like coming up with a style guide and
So more
doing
like
the
UI.
exactly
Okay.
UI stuff. So like coming up with a style guide, thinking about how a specific part of the page should look, or part of an experience should look. That broader exposure into product thinking and product design took some time for me to get a foothold of, but I definitely took a lot of time to learn.
No, for sure. It's
Yeah,
like, because I always say that with the boot camps, it's more of a starting point. It's kind of an overview. You're not going to go too deep into anything because you never
yeah.
know where you're going to go into. Each company's going to ask you to do some different stuff, like to spend time specializing in one specific niche would kind of be a waste of time, especially when you only have 3 months.
Exactly. So it's kind of expected. I don't think like a boot camp will necessarily prepare you for everything that's out there, but you'll know how to be a designer. I think that will that can think of design thinking end to end, and you can kind of apply yourself there. But like everything else, like on the collaborative front, how the business works and how the teams are structured, that is something that you just have to, I think learn
Yeah.
for sure. Yeah.
So talk more about this design thinking, because I actually saw
Yeah.
like a few posts this week. It's funny, like I haven't really seen anything about design thinking until this week, but now you mention it. So
Yeah.
how would you just define design thinking, and how should new designers coming out of boot camp be thinking about that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things there. With design thinking, for me, the simplest definition is trying to have a user-centered approach in solving a specific problem, right? And I
Mhm.
think that like when you there's many ways to like interpret it, but like if you think of the end-to-end design experience of like starting your journey as a designer from trying to discover the problem that's at hand, right? You want to be able to define the problem, because I think being able to define and articulate the problem is
Yeah,
solving half the
step
problem.
one.
Yeah, step one, and solving half the problem, because if you know what you're solving for, the rest, you just kind of follow a track, and you hopefully you're able to uncover and unfold things. And once you do that, is step one. Step two is like, all right, I need to understand who my users are. Let's do some user research, and kind of from there you are like, okay, I have insights, so I'm gonna build some features, or I'm gonna design a solution that I think might fit that user needs. And then from there, um, be able to test and validate the things that I think might solve this problem. And then from there, once you are able to validate that through showing it, potentially in a usability test, finally come up with high fidelity designs that realizes the vision that you were building for. And so, like in a short, like in that's to keep it to a few sentences, but I think there's a lot that goes into it, because a lot of what you're solving for depends on what's out there, in the competitive landscape, for how big this project is, and well, how is it scale, is it a redesign effort, or is it a completely foundationally new thing. I think all of that affects the scope of how you're going to conduct yourself as a designer.
Yeah, so yeah, the research part is so huge, in terms of, like you mentioned, looking at competitors. I think that's always a big thing, is seeing what's out there. What can you do to differentiate?
Yeah.
So what usually goes into like your research process before you even start?
I think the important thing there is to understand, like, first, you have to come up with a hypothesis of your own. I think, like, one thing you have to know is just like what you're gonna what you want to, like, know from users out there. And it totally depends. If it's like a redesign effort, you can tap into your existing user base, for example, and
That's the
try to
best.
right, yeah, it's like, there's a proven track record and things can be better, right? And from that, like, if you tap into your existing user base, I think the questions that you are asking can come from, like, feedback, right, that has been already incurred. But if you're exploring a whole different, like, space where, like, you're trying to create something new, I think that's a little more challenging. First, you're trying to figure out what problem that you're trying to solve, and the second thing is you're trying to figure out what questions to ask. And so, figuring out what questions to ask, not only like what question to ask from a user research perspective, but also, like, what are your learning objectives? I think that's something that I struggle with all the time, and I'm constantly trying to figure out, when it comes to a project that's, like, very foundationally new, from stakeholders, what they want to learn. As a designer, what do you think would uncover most of the users' desires in the problem space that you're working with? So I think navigating that is definitely a challenging bit for sure. But I think it's a very, very important one.
And then with the research, do you ever, talk to the developers in the process, saying, "Hey, like, can we build this, or what information do we have in the product to build this sort of dashboard," for example? So is that a common conversation?
It's always a conversation, because you have to know what's technically feasible out there, right? I mean, just an example over there. Example out here is, like, whenever whenever, like, design patterns become a very prominent thing that people notice, right? For example, take to dark mode, for example, right? 2019,
Yeah.
like, everybody wants dark mode, and like, for example, if Apple comes up with a native way to get that out, and now that's the expectation, it's not so easy being able to prioritize that in the backlog, because it depends on how big your product is, how much you've scaled it, what the code base is, what your company's priorities are, that are like, hey, can we, like, do this for our own product, right? And so, like, it's easy to say that, hey, like, 2019, like, dark mode is a trend, and 2020 more people are adopting dark mode, but that thing is actually a lot harder to do. And yeah, like, but, like, that's an example of something that, like, that becomes very trendy. But yeah, like, I think, like, trying to figure out what exactly is the existing infrastructure, and what exactly is the is the new thing in technology, I think, is, like, a constant conversation that I'm having, because I think I as a designer cannot ideate alone. I think what I'm the type of person that loves having everybody in a room and just say, hey, bring your ideas, because I don't think one designer, one technology, like somebody who's an engineer or one product manager is going to come and be like, hey, like, I think this is going to be this cool thing and we're going to do it. Like, I think I love the perspective from everybody.
Yeah, and I feel that with design because like I design most of the things for like my own startups, and like designing alone is crazy. Like I've coded alone, but design, like you need people, you need to get feedback across the board, and it's a collaborative process, like you said.
Oh yes, and that's what I love about it. It's I think you become a stronger designer the more you rely on collaboration between everybody who you think can collaborate on a project. I work with data scientists, I work with product managers, engineers, researchers, and content designers, and like every focus needs attention. Every perspective needs attention, and I think all of that coming together is what really builds a good product.
No, for sure. And looking at like the team setups, so like you just mentioned, developers, data scientists, product managers, researchers. So like, in your experience as a UX designer, is it kind of like with a PM when you have to synthesize information, or is the PM synthesize information for you to make a design?
I would say that I've had it both ways.
Okay.
So there have been a lot
Depend
of
on the company size.
It depends on the company size, but also the team size. Like for example, in Carfax, Capital One, and Facebook, I've seen it like all in different perspectives based on different teams. And I think that when you are like when it comes to the team, like I've worked on projects where like product managers are driving things based on kind of like what they know about the business priorities, but also like as I've kind of switched between the different companies that I have, like I think as I kind of went out of the consulting realm, I found opportunities for like the product designer / UX designer being at the seat of the table, and being like, hey, let's ideate and let's try to synthesize what we know about the space and really try to figure out how we're going to solve this problem. And I think more so than ever, right now, I as a product designer, I definitely feel more enabled to do that because we're trying to solve it more together. Like I think Facebook has a culture of trying to have everybody at the seat of the table and bring your perspective, and then say, hey, like, what are we going to do about this after everybody's spoken? But before, I've had one or the other. It's totally dependent on the team makeup, the design maturity of the organization, realizing the value of the design. I think that goes a long way.
Yeah, so I always think that like having more structure, going to a bigger company as your first job is always better. Would you say that's the case? Or?
Yeah, I would say it also depends on the industry too. So for example, if you're in a company that like that is a tech company, then you're probably going to find a lot of maturity that's going on, and progress towards like towards design and tech more than like your peers. But also like if you're I've found that when you're maybe in, I don't know, like the finance industry or whatever the other industry is, right, their core focus is something else, and tech has been kind of creeping its way in. And so as it has, and as more companies that have adopted the digitalization of everything, there has been a learning curve. And I don't think and from there, you have to kind of assess the design maturity of each company from there, because the culture is kind of what defines how much things are willing to be progressed. That being said, industry is one thing, but I think that yes, I would 100% agree with you that like as you go into a larger company, there's larger structure, there's a lot of accountability, and therefore things are a little more maybe thought through. Not that they aren't in like startups or medium-sized companies, because I think they are, but you have to do things in a lean and agile way, and that's an important consideration, because you got to move fast wherever, but I think it's more important in like medium-sized companies and startups. But things are more structurally acted on in larger companies, at least in my experience.
Yeah, well, and also in Facebook, they say move fast and break things. So
Yeah,
I'm assuming that you've probably experienced that firsthand.
yes, I think wherever I've been, I have to move fast. I think I'm breaking more things than I should be, but yeah, for sure. That's definitely part of our like core values. And we live by them for sure.
Yeah, well, you can't find when it works without breaking it first.
I totally agree. Otherwise, you're spinning around the same wheel. Yeah.
So looking at like the different companies you've gone through, like the interviews have probably changed along the way too.
Yeah.
So what are like the different types of interviews you've seen, and how, like what can you kind of share from them?
Yeah. I think that most of the interviews that I think that like are memorable in my head are the ones that challenged me the most. But in recent memory, a lot of what kind of goes into an interview process is like being able to present your portfolio,
Mhm.
being able to do a whiteboard exercise, being able to talk through a specific product together with another designer in the form of a product critique. Those are some of the things that I've gone through. Also, a presentation, like if you're able to present your previous work,
Okay.
which I would differentiate from like a portfolio review, because a portfolio review, looks at what you've done for sure, but like it's a walkthrough. A presentation sometimes can be in the form of nobody asking you necessarily all the questions, and you may have like a specific time limit to present all of your experience, and walking through them like in the form of case studies. So definitely a mix of all of that is what I've seen in my different interviews. Yeah, for sure.
And looking at your portfolio specifically, I know I've talked to some people that come out of boot camp and they're like, "Hey, I want to focus specifically on UX research." So like they're like, "All right, let me just ignore my portfolio." But
Yeah.
for people that are on that end, how would they prepare?
How would they prepare for
Well,
a product
like
design?
preparing the portfolio and then also like for actual design.
Yeah, for sure.
You have to focus on both. Do you think, no
I
matter
think
what?
I think whenever well, I think that like I encourage all the like every designer to be able to tell. So I'm also a mentor at CareerFoundry. So one of the things that I do is I always end up like encouraging students to be like, hey, so like I know like this is a product design and UX design course, but like you don't necessarily have to, especially for the ones who are intimidated by like very pretty visuals, and they want to focus more on content design or user research. You're absolutely right. Like I
Mhm.
encourage them to use more of their words, and that's okay. In fact, like if you look at my portfolio in the first, I can't, I think like every designer has this problem, but like when I go to my first project, I'm like, I can't believe I designed that. And because I'm like, the visuals, like, were not that great. Like, I just used a lot of borders and text and pictures. And like, I would always think, I'm like, hey, what does this company see in me? But at the end of the day, I was able to, kind of explain my product thinking, and be able to use words, as many as they were, but be able to tell that story, right? And so I always encourage folks who are kind of on that end to use more of the story, tell the whole story the way they have seen it through, from the end-to-end design thinking, right? But
Mhm.
you can always show your focus in that a little different. For example, if you're extremely about the visuals, go nuts, go make it pretty. But for somebody who's a little more research focused, they might put a little more thought into, like maybe a third of, just give you an example, a third of the portfolio being talking about discovering the problem and trying to figure out what landscape they're working with and what they had to learn, and from there kind of pivot to the other parts of the portfolio. So tell the whole story, but show your focus the way they want. Because on the other end, now that I've been on the professional side doing design for a couple of years, when we look at portfolios, we're like, oh, like that person did like a great visual presentation and they were great at their visuals. I think they'd be a great visual designer. But I look at this person over here and I see like more potential for product thinking. Oh, you know what? Maybe we'll like actually refer her to be a user researcher. Right,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah, or to a different team, be like, hey, like we found somebody who's like research focused, but like would fit another team. And so like there's a lot of that stuff going on, even if that's not necessarily like transparent in the world, but yeah, that's happening.
What would you say the split is, like UX versus UI designers, like in companies? Is like equal, or?
It's I would say there's more. From my experience, I've seen more like UX designers, and there's a lot of UI designers, like visual designers for sure.
Yeah.
And depending on the company, the size of the company, you could find them in specialist roles where all they're dedicated to is visual design, or maybe you're in a startup in a medium-sized company and they might be more leaning to the visual design, but they're generally well taught in UX, right? And so there's a little bit more of a hybrid, that I see more than like specialist UX and specialist UIs, because I think the expectation is that you have some notion of product thinking if you're a visual designer, UI designer. Um, but nevertheless, I do see a lot of specialists there.
Gotcha. And
Yeah.
coming out of bootcamp, like, would you say that one is easier to get than the other?
I have found that there's more availability for like UX design / product design kind of roles. Because I think the thinking behind that is like when it comes to some of the visual stuff, right? If there's a company that is that has a design system and you're just like leveraging it from it, I think regardless, good design maturity, a good indication of design maturity is if you are dealing with systems thinking and design systems. But anyways, I digress. Yeah, I think like a lot of roles become very so in my experience, it's a lot more like UX, simply because with design, for example, like the last few companies that I've been at, right? Like I can name it for you: Carfax, Capital One, Facebook. There's a lot of designers working on the design system, and the visuals around that. And so if like I'm on the enterprise side, I'm leveraging an enterprise design system, and from there I kind of leverage that. Like a lot of my day to day looks like I'm wireframing and doing a lot of product thinking exercises, but not necessarily like the full from the scratch of visuals, because that's kind of already there. But
That's
people
true.
go for it.
Like I usually don't think about that, but like I guess like most companies already have a design system, so like a UX designer can come in with not weak but medium UI skills and just kind of get to work and build stuff that works.
Exactly. And exactly. The thinking behind that is like, yes, you can learn the visual skills as much as you want. It's not that hard to kind of learn how to create border radiuses around a button, but it might be harder it might be harder for you to kind of learn how the product is that you're creating is like solving a problem. It's a little bit harder, right? So I think there's more of a demand for that. But at the same time, like I don't with visual design, like if you have a design system, there's a lot of designers dedicated to refining that design system, taking feedback from different teams on figuring out what is there and what's not there. Because at the end of the day, if you don't have a robust design system to be able to represent or express your ideas in the best way possible, then you just have a lack of tools to get you where you need to go. And so there are a good amount of visual designers who are there for sure, but I do end up seeing like more. But again, you can learn as you kind of go along.
Okay, no, that's insightful because I always assumed that UI designers were needed more, but I guess that was wrong. And then the other thing was that I looked at a lot of bootcamp grads, and I feel like most do not have good UI skills, and I thought that was kind of like a disadvantage. But like you say, like you don't really have to focus on UI if you can understand a product properly.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with the portfolios out there, the biggest thing is to be able to explain your process and tell a coherent story. I think I could not express that enough, because like if I looked at my portfolio, I didn't have like the best visual skills coming out, but I learned it over time. And then in retrospect, I was like, well, maybe I could have spent a little more time like refining those skills. But I was able to explain my process and my thinking, and I encourage people to, just like focus on that more than, trying to tidy up the visuals, because they, learn what you can, apply what you can, but there's a lot left to be learned. And I believe in like strengths-based, maximization, right? Like you play to your strengths as much as you can, and I think that gets you far.
Yeah, become like a master of one thing versus a dabbler in everything.
Exactly. Yeah.
No, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So looking at you right now, you said like you mentor at CareerFoundry. So that's been since 2015, right? That was like right off the bat.
2015. Yeah, it was right off the bat. They were like, hey, like, you seem to have a grasp with the subject, and so why don't you come mentor with us? And I said, yeah, that'll do. I took a break from 2019 to 2020, but I've just loved being able to use my spare time to empower other designers. It's something that I love to do. I remember how impactful my mentor was, going through the whole program. Leah, if you're listening to this, a lot of love and peace. But yeah, and the thing there was when she made it like, she made the learning so personalized for me, and really empowered me. I was like, I have to do this for other people, because I want people to know what design is, right? Like, it's more than just like design thinking. It's being able to tell your story, and because the people who go into this, I would hope, are into this field are extremely passionate about what they're doing. And I want to be able to enable as many people as I can to do that in whatever capacity. So, been mentoring since 2015.
What's
End of
the
2015.
number one kind of either thing that they struggle with or question that they ask you?
Yeah, is my portfolio good enough? But also
Classic.
I think it's just like go through the boot camp. But I also say that I think as you are going through the course, you'll find that you'll find your focus, and you'll find exactly how you want to be able to tell your story. The course does a great job in itself of like going through an in-depth lesson by lesson, achievement by achievement kind of structure, and you have to just put in a lot of the work. But I think the number one question that comes every time that I have my first call with them is just like, does this really work? Do people get jobs? And how long does it take to get a job, right? I think that's the biggest thing.
That's a big one I hear also.
Yeah, and I'm one of those people that like to keep people's expectations low, because what I want to do is, like you get it. It's a good method, right? Because I could tell you that the average is 3 months after you graduate boot camp, which is realistic, but it's a competitive market, and we're in a pandemic right now, so things are just slower. And so what I've been telling my students is just like, I would expect around 5 months to until you from graduating your career, your bootcamp course, and then being able to sign an offer letter, because things are moving slower, but it is a competitive market. But I also tell them that if you go through the course, that you'll be able to create like portfolio pieces that you'll be able to speak to and be proud of. And I think the course, does a great job of doing that. And we as mentors are there to support you through that. And yeah, that's like the biggest question that I get for sure.
Yeah, and when you put it in perspective, to change careers and get a job in less than a year, like that's amazing.
That's
Like
amazing.
people have to realize that, like especially if you're other people going through 4-year colleges, and then also sometimes they don't graduate with a job and they're job searching anyways, but they have way more debt. So
That's actually a great point that you brought up. I kind of want to like piggyback off of that and say, yeah, like a lot of people go into master's degrees, right? And they're great things, but often they can be expensive, and you may not
I know
necessarily.
firsthand.
Yeah. Which what do you do your master's in, Rob?
Information systems, but I
Information
ended up
systems.
teaching myself everything for data science in my first jobs anyways, so didn't
Yeah,
do
yeah.
much.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think I'll kind of bounce off that and say, hey, that's like a 2-year commitment, and it's expensive. And as an alternative, you've got the boot camp, which is lower cost, but it has more practical, on the jobs kind of, training, that I think like it condenses in a good amount of time and relatively more affordable. So yeah, that's a good thing to point out, because often, we're so fast to kind of like transition into we're excited, we want to transition into this new thing, probably don't
Mhm.
want to be doing whatever we're doing right now and just kind of move on, right? So I think that's a great perspective to add.
Yeah. All right. So let's finish up, and I always like to finish up on 2 specific questions. So
Yeah.
the first one, if you were graduating from a boot camp today, what would be your plan to get a job?
Well, yeah. So I think the one thing that I would be doing is leveraging my LinkedIn network for sure. Everything is, every job opportunity I've gotten is
Who you
through
know?
that, right? Who exactly, and being able to broaden your network, be able to attend any kind of virtual meetups, or when the world opens back up, physical meetups. Always, bring exposure to yourself. I think that's like the first thing that I would do. If you've got passion projects, and you're not getting a job, you've got passionate ideas and you want to be able to express them in a way that you can solve a problem, that you would be there, create another portfolio piece. That's what I would do. I would create like an extra portfolio piece to stand out. I would constantly network, and I would just have a loud voice out there, because the more you're able to shout out that I'm here, it brings a lot of more attention to you. Translating that into the real life, if you are able to post about like things that you're passionate about in the design field, post about it on LinkedIn. Do whatever it takes to get exposure, because I think that's the biggest thing. Is very important, very important.
I agree. You gotta let people know you exist. If not, they'll never find you.
I agree.
And then the second question. So, what's the most important thing to do in the first year of your career to kickstart it?
Go into learning mode. And I mean this in every single sense of the way, because you think you know everything by going out of a boot camp or whatever your experience is, and then when you're learning on the job, you need to be flexible. You need to say, okay, yes, I'm going to do this. Treat like, I think I made the mistake of being a little too hard headed and thinking that I knew everything. And only to find out that there was so much to do. And so I would say, like ask as many questions as you can, put yourself in learning mode, do everything until you realize exactly what you want to do. Because if you're a designer who loves to do the visuals but never necessarily realized it, well, you tried and failed everything, and then you well, not failed, but you didn't do it that great, and then you ended up getting to a good point in one thing. And so now you can maximize that one thing to
Mhm.
really get you far ahead. And so be in learning mode, ask a lot of questions, be open minded to trying everything. Um, that your field can possibly demand of you, and then it gets easier from there. I would
That's
say
true.
that.
Yeah, like the learning does not stop in any field in tech. Honestly, everything's always changing, so you got to keep on learning.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, there you have it, everyone. So you heard from Abhi today. He graduated from CareerFoundry, worked his way up through multiple jobs. Now he's working at Facebook. He's killing it. He's giving back at CareerFoundry, mentoring other students. So thank you so much, Abhi, for helping us on booting up and sharing all your tips, all your learnings. For anyone
Glad to
else,
be here.
no, definitely. And for everyone else that's listening, make sure to subscribe, leave a like, and we'll be back again next week. So hope to see you then. But otherwise, have a great night. And Abhi, thank you again.
Thank you for having me, Rod.